Chapter 19 Shared Vulnerabilities. The aftermath of their tense conversation hung in the air as Mara and Kale resumed their journey. Although the path ahead remained uncertain, something had shifted between them, a fragile, unspoken bond that neither had anticipated. The raw honesty they had shared had peeled back some of the layers they had built around themselves for protection, leaving them feeling more exposed, yet unexpectedly closer. The silence that followed their words was not the strained silence of before, but rather one filled with a newfound understanding. As they walked side by side, the landscape around them seemed to reflect the change in their relationship. The narrow, winding trail they followed was flanked by towering trees, their dense canopies casting dappled shadows on the ground. The quiet rustle of leaves and the distant calls of unseen creatures provided a soothing backdrop to their thoughts. For the first time in a long while, the silence between them was comfortable, almost companionable. It was as if the walls they had both erected to protect themselves from the world had begun to crumble, revealing the vulnerability that had kept them distant from each other. Mara found herself stealing glances at Kale, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor. There was a softness to his expression now, a calmness that hadn't been there before. She realized that the tension that had once crackled between them had given way to something deeper, something more meaningful. It was as if they had reached a tacit agreement, an understanding that they no longer had to shoulder their burdens alone. The defenses they had both clung to so fiercely were no longer necessary, and the connection that had begun to form felt more authentic, more real. As they continued to walk in silence, the weight of their shared experience began to settle into something more solid. They didn't need to speak to acknowledge the shift that had occurred. It was evident in the way they moved, in the way they no longer hesitated to share the space between them. The journey ahead was still fraught with challenges, and the dangers they faced were as real as ever. But now there was a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. The unspoken bond they had formed would serve as a foundation for whatever lay ahead, a reminder that even in the midst of uncertainty and fear, they were not alone. It wasn't long before the weight of their new understanding began to press on them, subtly altering the dynamics of their journey. The path they followed twisted through a dense forest, where towering trees formed a natural canopy overhead. The sunlight, now softened by the approaching evening, filtered through the leaves, casting long, shifting shadows on the forest floor. The tranquility of their surroundings was in stark contrast to the tension that still simmered beneath the surface, a tension that neither of them could fully ignore. The silence between them, though less strained, carried an undercurrent of unresolved emotion, leaving the air thick with unspoken thoughts. As they walked, Kale's usual composure seemed to waver. He had always been the epitome of stoic resolve, the one who could maintain a level head even in the most dire circumstances. But now, the relentless pressure of their mission, coupled with the vulnerability he had recently allowed himself to express, was beginning to take its toll. The fears and doubts that he had managed to keep at bay for so long were now creeping closer to the surface, threatening to undermine the calm exterior he had always relied on. With every step, the weight of those suppressed emotions grew heavier, until it became impossible to ignore. The quiet around them, once a refuge, now seemed to amplify the turmoil within him. Each rustle of leaves, each distant call of a bird, seemed to echo the thoughts that raced through his mind. His gaze remained fixed on the path ahead, but his thoughts were far from the winding trail they followed. The realization that he could no longer afford to keep his emotions buried was both frightening and liberating. He could feel the pressure building inside him, an almost physical sensation that demanded release. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of internal struggle, he broke the silence that had settled between them. "Mara," he began, his voice quieter than usual, laced with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. The sound of his own voice surprised him, as if the words had taken on a life of their own, bypassing the barriers he had carefully constructed. He paused, searching for the right words, but they eluded him. Instead, what came out was a confession, raw and unguarded. "I've been trying to stay strong, to keep us both moving forward, but it's not as easy as I make it look. This mission, everything we've been through, it's wearing on me. More than I want to admit." Mara turned to look at him, her expression softening as she caught the vulnerability in his voice. The revelation wasn't entirely unexpected. She had sensed the cracks in his armor for some time now, but hearing him voice it was different. It made her realize that despite their differences, despite the tension that had grown between them, they were both struggling with the same fears. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself," she said gently, her tone a mix of understanding and resolve. "We're in this together, Cale. Whatever happens, we face it together." Her words, simple yet sincere, struck a chord deep within him. The tension that had been building inside him began to ease, if only slightly. It wasn't a complete release. Years of ingrained habits and defenses couldn't be undone in a single moment, but it was a start. For the first time in what felt like ages, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his emotions, to acknowledge the fear, the doubt, and the weariness that had been gnawing at him. And in doing so, he found a sliver of peace. As they continued down the winding path, side by side, the silence that followed was no longer heavy with unspoken tensions. Instead, it was filled with a quiet understanding, a mutual acknowledgement of their shared burdens. The journey ahead remained uncertain, the dangers they faced still very real, but in that moment, they found solace in each other's presence. The bond they had forged in the crucible of their mission was stronger now, tempered by the shared vulnerability they had allowed themselves to show. And as the shadows lengthened and the forest grew darker, they walked on, united in purpose and in their determination to see their mission through, no matter what lay ahead. "You know, Mara," Cale began, his gaze fixed on the path ahead as they continued through the dense forest. "I've spent most of my life being taught that showing weakness is unacceptable. That as a leader, I have to be the one everyone else leans on, the one who never falters." His voice carried a hint of the internal struggle he had been battling. "But the truth is, I'm not as strong as I pretend to be." Mara glanced at him, her expression a mix of surprise and empathy. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, the quiet punctuated only by the distant rustle of leaves. Cale's admission was a stark contrast to the composed facade he usually maintained. "Every decision we've had to make," he continued, his voice steady despite the weight of his words, "every close call we've had, it all weighs on me more than I'd like to admit." The vulnerability he was finally allowing to surface was palpable, a rare glimpse into the pressures he had long kept hidden. Mara nodded slowly, her own feelings of frustration and fatigue momentarily overshadowed by the depth of Cale's confession. "Cale, we're in this together," she said softly, her tone carrying a warmth that contrasted with the cool forest air. "I've seen the weight you carry, and I understand how hard it must be to shoulder it alone. You don't have to pretend to be infallible." Her words were meant to offer reassurance, a recognition of the burdens they both carried. Cale let out a slow breath, a sense of relief washing over him as he processed Mara's response. "It's hard to let go of that expectation," he admitted. "I've always felt that if I showed any sign of weakness, it would undermine everything we're trying to achieve. But I'm starting to see that maybe I don't have to be perfect. Maybe it's okay to admit that I'm struggling." His gaze softened, reflecting a newfound openness as he shared his internal battle. Mara's eyes met his with a mixture of understanding and resolve. "We're both carrying a lot," she said, her voice firm yet kind. "And it's not just about how we handle it individually. It's about being there for each other through it all." She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. We face these challenges as a team, and that means supporting each other, not just through the victories but through the struggles too. The forest around them seemed to take on a quieter, more intimate feel, as if it too was acknowledging the significance of the moment. Cale nodded, a small but genuine smile forming on his lips. "Thank you, Mara," he said, his voice filled with appreciation. "I needed to hear that. We'll get through this together." The weight of their shared vulnerabilities had created a deeper connection between them, a renewed sense of unity that would be crucial as they continued their journey. Mara slowed her pace, her steps becoming more deliberate as she turned her head slightly to catch a glimpse of Cale's expression. The admission he had made lingered in her mind, surprising her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Though she had always been aware of Cale's meticulous nature and his ability to strategize under pressure, this raw, vulnerable side of him was a revelation. It was as if she had been given access to a deeper, more authentic version of the man she had come to rely on. The dense canopy of trees above cast dappled shadows on the forest floor, creating a serene yet introspective atmosphere. Mara had always admired Cale's strategic mind and his composure in the face of danger. His calm demeanor was something she had come to depend on, especially during their most trying moments. But hearing him speak so openly about his internal struggles shifted her perspective. It was a stark contrast to the image of unshakable strength he had always projected. The revelation brought with it a profound sense of empathy. Mara realized that beneath the surface of Cale's royal upbringing and sharp intellect lay a person who was grappling with his own insecurities and fears. This new understanding made her see him in a different light, not just as a colleague or a leader, but as someone who shared the same vulnerabilities and uncertainties that she did. It was a reminder that no matter how composed or capable someone appeared, they were still human. She reflected on her own struggles and the weight of the mission they were both shouldering. The honesty Cale had displayed created a bridge between their experiences, allowing her to connect with him on a deeper level. Their shared challenges had always been a common ground, but now, with Cale's vulnerability exposed, it felt as though that ground had become more solid, more meaningful. It underscored the reality that they were not alone in their burdens, but partners navigating through the storm together. Mara's newfound perspective also brought a sense of relief. It was as if a layer of tension had been lifted, making way for a more genuine connection between them. She could now approach their challenges with a renewed sense of solidarity, knowing that they were both equally affected by the pressures and fears that their mission entailed. The forest around them seemed to reflect this newfound understanding, offering a calm backdrop to their evolving partnership. As they continued their journey through the forest, Mara felt a strengthened resolve to support Cale as he had supported her. The acknowledgement of their mutual vulnerabilities forged a deeper bond, one that would be crucial as they faced the uncertain path ahead. This moment of shared honesty not only deepened their personal connection but also fortified their resolve to face the trials of their mission with renewed strength and unity. Feeling a pang of empathy, Mara decided to open up as well. The dense forest around them seemed to create a cocoon of intimacy, and she found herself compelled to share her own struggles. She had never been one to easily reveal her vulnerabilities. Years of fending for herself had taught her to guard her emotions closely. But something about this moment felt different, a rare opportunity for genuine connection amidst the chaos that surrounded them. Mara's voice was soft, carrying the weight of her burdens as she spoke. "I get it," she said, her tone reflective and tinged with the strain of her own experiences. "I've spent so much time trying to prove that I can handle anything that comes my way, that I'm strong enough to take on whatever life throws at me." Her words were laced with the vulnerability she had often kept hidden behind a facade of strength. The admission felt like a release, an acknowledgement of the pressure she had been under. She continued, her eyes focused on the path ahead, unable to meet Cale's gaze directly. "But sometimes I feel like I'm barely holding it together. There are nights when I can't sleep because all I can think about are the people we've lost, the choices we've had to make, and whether or not we're doing the right thing." Her voice faltered slightly, revealing the depth of her inner turmoil. The honesty in her words was a stark contrast to the self-assured persona she usually projected. The forest stillness seemed to envelop her confession, the only sounds being the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of birds. Cale, who had been processing his own vulnerabilities, now listened intently, his expression a mix of concern and understanding. The weight of Mara's admission resonated with him, further deepening the bond that had been forming between them. He realized that her struggles mirrored his own, and that they were united by their shared burdens. Mara's heart felt lighter after speaking, though the road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. The act of sharing her fears and doubts with Cale brought a sense of relief, making her feel less isolated in her struggles. It was as if the act of voicing her insecurities had bridged the gap between their individual experiences, creating a shared space where both of them could find solace. As they continued to walk through the forest, the weight of their conversation lingered in the air, transforming the atmosphere between them. The unspoken understanding that had grown from their shared vulnerabilities provided a new layer of connection. Mara felt a renewed sense of solidarity with Cale, realizing that their partnership had been strengthened by their openness. With each step, the tension that had previously marked their interaction seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet, mutual respect. They had both taken a significant emotional risk, and the reward was a deeper, more authentic partnership. This moment of shared honesty was not just a respite from their challenges, but a crucial step toward facing the uncertainties of their mission with renewed strength. Her admission echoed Cale's, both of them laying bare the fears that had been gnawing at them from the inside. The weight of their shared vulnerabilities hung in the air, creating a palpable sense of intimacy that neither had expected. For a moment, the dense forest around them seemed to pause, the sounds of rustling leaves and distant wildlife fading into the background as they absorbed the depth of each other's confessions. The brief silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. They stood there, side by side, their breaths coming in measured intervals as they processed the impact of their conversation. The forest, usually a backdrop to their arduous journey, now felt like a sanctuary that held their secrets and fears in its quiet embrace. The stillness provided a space where their raw emotions could be felt more acutely, making the moment feel even more profound. The vulnerability they had just shared was both raw and unfamiliar, a stark contrast to the stoic personas they had maintained. Mara, usually guarded and resilient, had revealed the cracks in her armor, while Cale had exposed the cracks in his facade of royal composure. This mutual exposure created a new dynamic between them, one marked by a deeper empathy and understanding. It was as if their admissions had cleared the air of the previous tensions, allowing them to see each other's true selves. Despite the discomfort of their revelations, it felt like a necessary step toward healing the rift that had formed between them. The openness they had displayed allowed them to confront the barriers that had been erected by stress and unspoken grievances. They both recognized that their emotional honesty was crucial for rebuilding their partnership, making it stronger and more resilient in the face of their shared challenges. As they continued their journey through the forest, the atmosphere between them had shifted. The bond forged in their moment of vulnerability gave them a renewed sense of connection and solidarity. Each step felt lighter, their burdens slightly eased by the knowledge that they were not alone in their struggles. The forest, once a symbol of their isolation, now felt like a testament to their growing unity. The forest path seemed to stretch out before them with a newfound sense of purpose. With the weight of their shared vulnerabilities acknowledged, they were better equipped to face the uncertainties of their mission. The silence that had once been filled with tension now held a quiet promise of mutual support and understanding, providing them with the strength to move forward together. Cale stopped walking, his steps coming to an abrupt halt as he turned to face Mara fully. The forest around them seemed to close in, the dense canopy above casting dappled shadows that danced on the ground. His expression was a mix of vulnerability and resolve, his usually guarded demeanor giving way to something more raw. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" he began, his voice carrying the weight of his inner conflict. "The idea that no matter how much we plan or how hard we fight, things could still go wrong. That we could lose more than we're prepared to." His eyes, typically shielded behind layers of composure, now revealed a rare openness. There was an unsettling honesty in his gaze, a reflection of the turmoil he had kept hidden for so long. The truth of their situation, the constant threat of failure and loss, had etched itself deeply into his thoughts. "But I think maybe it's okay to be scared," he continued, his voice softening as he spoke. "To admit that we don't have all the answers. We're in this together, and maybe if we're honest about our fears, we can find a way to face them together too." Mara listened, her eyes locked onto Cale's as she took in his words. The forest silence seemed to amplify the sincerity of his confession, allowing her to grasp the depth of his feelings. His willingness to acknowledge his fears, rather than masking them with stoicism, created a new level of intimacy between them. The walls they had maintained, built from years of individual struggles and strained interactions, began to crumble under the weight of this shared honesty. As the moment stretched between them, Mara felt a shift within herself. The admission of fear, once a point of contention, now felt like a bridge rather than a chasm. She nodded slowly, her voice steady as she responded. "I think you're right. We've been so focused on being strong and having a plan that we've forgotten it's okay to be vulnerable. We don't have to face this alone, and maybe being honest about our fears is the first step toward finding our way through this." The mutual understanding forged in this conversation seemed to light their path forward, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the uncertainty that lay ahead. Mara nodded, a deep sense of relief washing over her that she hadn't anticipated. The emotional weight that had been pressing on her seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a newfound clarity. In that moment, the connection she felt with Cale was profound, an understanding that went beyond mere words and resonated with the rawness of their shared experiences. This connection was grounded in a mutual recognition of their own vulnerabilities, a realization that they were not just allies but fellow travelers on a perilous journey. The realization that they were both grappling with their own fears and insecurities created a bond that Mara hadn't expected. It was a rare and comforting understanding that made her feel less isolated in the face of the immense challenges they were up against. The acknowledgement of their shared humanity, the unspoken agreement that they both had limits and struggles, forged a connection that was both deep and comforting. "You're right," Mara finally said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We've been trying to do this alone for too long, thinking that we have to carry the weight of it all by ourselves." Her words were a reflection of the shift in her perspective, acknowledging the toll that their solitary efforts had taken on their partnership. The burden of their mission had seemed heavier because they had been shouldering it individually, rather than as a united front. She paused, taking a deep breath as she considered the implications of their shared vulnerability. "But maybe we don't have to," she continued, her tones softening with hope. "Maybe we can lean on each other when it gets too heavy." The idea of mutual support, of finding strength in one another rather than solely within themselves, offered a glimmer of hope that had been missing from their earlier interactions. Cale listened intently, his eyes reflecting the weight of Mara's words. The prospect of leaning on each other, of truly collaborating in both strategy and emotional support, seemed like a crucial turning point. He could feel the tension that had characterized their relationship begin to ease, replaced by a sense of partnership that was both invigorating and reassuring. As they continued walking through the forest, the air seemed lighter, and the shadows that had once loomed large over their journey began to recede. The mutual understanding they had reached allowed them to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose. They no longer had to face their fears alone. They could draw strength from their shared resolve and the bond they had just begun to forge. This moment of connection, forged in the midst of their shared vulnerabilities, became a foundation upon which they could build. It was a reminder that despite the dangers and the uncertainties ahead, they had each other to rely on. This newfound partnership, strengthened by their honesty and mutual support, would be their greatest asset as they faced the trials that lay before them. The vulnerability they had shared forged a new sense of solidarity between Mara and Kale, one that felt more genuine and unbreakable than anything they had known before. This bond was a testament to their willingness to lay bare their fears and insecurities, creating a foundation of trust that was both profound and comforting. It was as if the walls that had previously separated them had been dismantled, replaced by a connection that was as strong as it was sincere. As they resumed walking through the forest, the silence between them was no longer charged with tension or unspoken grievances. Instead, it was filled with a mutual understanding that had been absent from their partnership until now. The quiet was comfortable, a reflection of their new level of intimacy and comprehension. Each step they took was accompanied by a shared awareness that they were no longer facing their challenges in isolation but as a united front. The path ahead remained treacherous, fraught with the dangers and complexities of the conspiracy they were fighting against. The shadows of their mission still loomed large, and the obstacles they faced were far from resolved. However, the newly forged bond between them provided a sense of clarity and strength that had been missing before. They were acutely aware that their journey was far from over, but their renewed connection made the daunting road ahead seem more navigable. Their newfound resolve was not driven solely by duty or obligation but by the trust and connection they had built in this moment of shared vulnerability. This resolve was imbued with a deeper significance, as it stemmed from a genuine understanding of each other's struggles and fears. The knowledge that they could rely on each other, not just as partners in a mission but as individuals who had come to deeply care for one another, gave them a sense of purpose that transcended their previous motivations. With each passing moment, the impact of their emotional exchange became increasingly apparent. The tension that had once clouded their interactions began to dissipate, replaced by a clear and focused determination. They approached their mission with a renewed sense of unity, their bond serving as a source of strength and encouragement. The challenges they faced seemed less daunting when viewed through the lens of their strengthened partnership. The forest around them, once a symbol of the unknown and the dangerous, now felt like a backdrop to their reaffirmed commitment. The whispering leaves and the dappled sunlight provided a calming contrast to the storm of their mission, offering a moment of tranquility amidst the chaos. Their journey was far from over, but they walked it together with a sense of solidarity that had been newly established. As they continued their trek, the weight of their shared vulnerabilities became a source of empowerment. It was a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles and that their partnership, forged in the crucible of their fears, was a powerful force. This newfound connection would be their greatest asset as they faced the trials that lay ahead, providing both the strength and the courage they needed to confront the conspiracy and the dangers that awaited them. As the forest began to thin, the dense canopy of trees gradually gave way to a clearing that marked the approach to their next destination. The soft, dappled light that filtered through the remaining foliage cast a warm glow on the path ahead, creating a striking contrast to the dark and oppressive atmosphere they had navigated through. Mara and Kale walked side by side, their steps falling into a comfortable rhythm, each step a testament to the newfound understanding between them. Despite the relative calm of the clearing, the journey ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty. The challenges they faced were far from over, and the path forward was fraught with risks they could not yet fully anticipate. Yet, there was a marked difference in their demeanor. The weight of their shared vulnerabilities and the strength of their renewed bond had imbued them with a sense of resilience that had previously eluded them. They no longer faced the looming threats with trepidation but with a unified front that was both reassuring and empowering. The bond they had forged in the crucible of their mission had transformed their relationship from mere allies in a fight to true partners in a shared struggle. This connection was more than just a result of their experiences. It was a deliberate choice to stand together despite the dangers and doubts that had once driven a wedge between them. Their mutual support and understanding had turned their partnership into something profoundly meaningful, a source of strength that would guide them through the trials they were yet to face. Walking in sync, they felt a new kind of solidarity, one that transcended the tactical and strategic elements of their mission. Their shared experiences and open conversations had created a foundation of trust and empathy that would serve as their greatest asset in the days to come. They were not just facing their adversaries with a plan and purpose, but with a deep and abiding connection that made their commitment to each other and their cause even more resolute. As they emerged from the forest and approached the edge of the clearing, the vast expanse of their next challenge stretched out before them. The landscape was both beautiful and daunting, a reminder of the grand scale of their undertaking. Yet the clarity of their purpose and the strength of their bond provided a sense of calm amidst the uncertainty. They were ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that they would do so together, fortified by their shared vulnerabilities and the understanding they had cultivated. With each step forward, Mara and Kale carried with them not just the burden of their mission but the profound realization that they had found something invaluable in each other. The path ahead was uncertain, but their partnership, forged in the heat of their trials and tempered by their openness, was a beacon of hope and strength. They were no longer just fighting a battle, they were navigating their journey together with a renewed sense of purpose and unity.